A major severe weather outbreak is coming to the United States over the next few days, and this will cause big problems, including a widespread risk for damaging winds, large to very large hail, and several tornadoes, which some of those could be strong and as well as long tracked. In addition to that, an extreme fire risk is going to be taking place tomorrow from the southern plains, even back into parts of the Midwest. So in today's forecast, we are going to break down exactly what you need to know about this dangerous storm that is coming to the United States. We'll begin with what's happening across the country right now, and we actually still have a storm system in the southeast today that is bringing a few isolated severe storms to parts of Alabama, Georgia, and Florida. This actually brought a little bit of severe weather yesterday to Texas. We didn't really get much out of it other than just some hail, but there is a low-end hail, wind, and as well as tornado risk over the next few hours in those areas before eventually a large storm system moves over the Rockies, and we are anticipating this to blow up into a very intense storm system tomorrow, and this is expected to bring two different severe weather outbreaks on Friday and Saturday, and then more severe weather as we go into Sunday along the East Coast. Now let's talk more about the severe weather potential for the next few days, and we'll begin with tomorrow, which is Flying Fences Friday. We have a moderate risk of severe weather in place in eastern Missouri, central and western Illinois, even into Kentucky and Tennessee, and a little sliver there of Arkansas and Iowa, where we are anticipating a threat for widespread damaging winds. The severe weather risk, though, is really large. I mean, we could literally see severe weather anywhere from northern Wisconsin and Minnesota all the way back towards the Gulf Coast. The main concern for Friday will be widespread damaging winds. I also want to point out that there will be some storms that attempt to fire off during the early to mid-afternoon hours in western Missouri, and those could actually produce what we call isolated dry lightning, meaning there's no rain, but there's lightning, which actually could spark some fire. So something to keep in mind back over in those areas. Nonetheless, we are talking about a large area where damaging winds between 60 to 90 miles per hour will be a possibility. Make sure that you're hatching down trampolines, put loose line items inside. Do not leave those out because those could go flying tomorrow. We literally could see flying trampolines cross over multiple different states with how strong the winds will be, not just at the surface, but even up into the atmosphere. Further down to the south, there's also a risk for some damaging winds, but it's a little bit more conditional back over in the Dixie Alley. Our large hail risk is mainly centered across the Midwest, really along the Mississippi River Valley from St. Louis back into northwestern Mississippi. Make sure that you're protecting your vehicles as we could see up to baseball-sized hail tomorrow. And tornadoes could be happening across a very large area tomorrow afternoon and evening, and even into the overnight hours from the Midwest all the way back down towards the Gulf Coast. But I do want to point out that this hatched area here is where we could see strong and maybe even an isolated long-track tornado tomorrow evening. So definitely make sure that you have multiple ways to receive alerts, have a tornado action plan ready to go. We are going to be live for a large chunk of tomorrow afternoon and evening covering this severe weather outbreak, and we'll also be live on Saturday with a bunch of different storm chasers. So definitely make sure that you are subscribed to the channel and click the bell icon so you're notified when we do go live. I also think we will end up seeing some sort of upgrade to a 15% tornado risk somewhere here along the Mississippi River Valley, but it's really going to depend on if we end up seeing discrete supercellular activity and if the models continue to trend a bit more upwards in terms of our setup for tomorrow. But nonetheless, even if that does not happen, we are still talking about a significant tornado risk. And out of all my years of covering severe weather events in addition to tornado outbreaks, I honestly don't think I've seen a day quite like Saturday where we have such high confidence of there being a potential tornado outbreak days in advance. I mean, we've been talking about this for almost a week now, and honestly, Saturday looks very concerning across the Dixie Alley. The Storm Prediction Center has maintained a moderate risk of severe weather for now across areas like Alabama, Mississippi, and Louisiana. I do want to point out that the SPC cannot issue day 3 high risks. That's just not a thing. So obviously, this is the highest risk that we have as of right now, but I would fully anticipate that there will be a high risk of severe weather somewhere in the Dixie Alley for Saturday's event. Nonetheless, though, this is a major severe weather event that we are expecting on Saturday when it comes to widespread damaging winds and also multiple tornadoes, which we are anticipating that there will be some strong and long-track tornadoes. I don't even think an intense or violent tornado can be ruled out in this environment. Now, obviously, I am using a lot of concerning verbiage like violent tornadoes or intense tornadoes, but that's just what it is at this point. We have a lot of wind shear, a lot of instability. This is a very favorable environment, and we do not see this very often where the environment is this favorable, even in the Dixie Alley. Again, I honestly think that we are going to see several tornadoes on Saturday. We are anticipating a line of storms to develop in addition to discrete supercells out in front of that as we go into the afternoon hours on Saturday. And even before that happens, we could actually see a couple of tornadoes occur overnight Friday night into Saturday morning across parts of Alabama and Mississippi. So definitely make sure that you're staying weather aware. If you're in a mobile home, it's a good idea to make sure you know where you're going on Saturday, because you do not want to be in a mobile home if you're in a tornado warning or even a severe thunderstorm warning. It is not a safe place to be. Now, the good news is that not all of us will see tornadoes, and for the vast majority of us, we will not see a tornado. But you obviously want to make sure that you're prepared for this event, and make sure that you are subscribed to the channel, as we'll be live covering this on both Friday and Saturday with in-depth coverage with the latest on tornado warnings and as well as severe thunderstorm warnings here across most of the United States. And one thing I also want to point out is that there's always a fail mode when it comes to these severe weather outbreaks. We've had high risks before that have not panned out. It is always a possibility, but the odds of it are obviously relatively low. The only thing that could really stop this is us having a bunch of showers and storms in the morning that are currently not forecasted, by the way, to happen. So that would kind of, basically stabilize the atmosphere in a way, but I just don't see that happening at this point. Further off to the north, we are still expecting severe weather, even back up into the Ohio Valley, into Kentucky, Ohio, Indiana, and Pennsylvania. This is a more conditional risk for severe weather, but I do anticipate some damaging winds and even a few tornadoes being possible if the environment is able to destabilize as we go into the afternoon hours. And the severe weather risk will continue Sunday from Pennsylvania and New Jersey, and even parts of New York, all the way back through Florida, where there will be some damaging winds and a conditional tornado risk, and that tornado risk will be mainly in the Carolinas and also back into Georgia. The good news is that Sunday does not look like it'll be a major outbreak by any means, but there will be some severe weather. Make sure that you are staying weather aware on Sunday. We'll have more details on this as well in future videos and as well as our live streams. Beginning with Friday, our tornado threat is continuing to increase. We are anticipating a lot of wind shear and as well as a lot of instability, which will mix for a very favorable environment. These are your tornado parameter values around 5, 6, 7 o'clock tomorrow afternoon. Notice how those values are really on the rise across Missouri, Arkansas, and Illinois. Our main corridor of severe weather is mainly going to be in this region, though, around 7 p.m. tomorrow. It's a lot more conditional further south. We are anticipating a lot less storm activity here until we get closer to like 10 to 12 o'clock, so it's going to be a much more nocturnal threat further down to the south and east. But nonetheless, it is a very favorable environment where strong and even long-track tornadoes are a possibility, especially if we get discrete cells that are long-tracked. That is really what we need to be watching for tomorrow, and I think the greatest tornado risk will be mainly in southern Illinois and also into eastern and southeastern parts of Missouri, mainly from 7 p.m. until about 1 a.m. But again, tornadoes, damaging winds, and hail are possible at other times. I think that's going to be the peak of the threat, though, and we'll definitely be live during that time frame. As we go into the overnight hours, the tornado threat is going to continue. We still have an environment here across the Ohio Valley and even back into the Dixie Alley where tornadoes will be a possibility even when many of you are going to be sleeping Friday night into early Saturday morning. The good news is I think the risk will be a little bit lower out here to the east. I think this is going to be a bit more of a conditional risk. It's going to depend on if we still have discrete cells that are still ongoing, which right now does not appear as if we're going to have many of those during the overnight hours. But I think back over in the Dixie Alley, we're going to have multiple of those happening in the early morning hours, and we'll talk more about that in detail in just a moment. For the timing tomorrow, we are expecting storms to fire up around 3 to 4 o'clock in Iowa and as well as Missouri. These will be mostly Boeing segments, which means that we're mainly talking about a significant wind risk, not necessarily a tornado risk, but I do think the tornado risk will increase as we get closer to sunset in Missouri and as well as southeast Iowa. And notice how this is, again, a line of thunderstorms that'll be producing QLCS tornadoes, which means tornadoes will be embedded in the line of thunderstorms. We could see even a strong tornado in that line. By around 8 to 9 o'clock, the storms are moving through St. Louis, western Illinois, and even into southeastern Missouri before eventually this line is pushing towards Chicago and southern Wisconsin as we get closer to midnight. Good news is that this will be weakening as it moves into these areas, but there will still be damaging winds associated with this activity, and maybe even a tornado or two still being a possibility all the way towards Chicago. And then into the overnight hours, there will be some more showers and thunderstorms in Indiana, Michigan, and Ohio. The HRRR is indicating that we'll have some convection out in front of the line, and if that does happen, the line will be weaker in areas like Indiana and Ohio. But if for some reason there are no storms out in front of that line, we actually could see a more intense line of storms moving across Illinois and western Indiana during the overnight hours, but for the time being, it does not appear as if it will be that significant. I think it'll be mostly just isolated wind and also a low-end tornado risk. A bit further down to the south, this tornado risk is a little bit more conditional. It's going to depend on if we get discrete supercells firing off around 8 to 9 o'clock tomorrow evening, but I honestly think that we will at least see 1 or 2 storms down this direction. The HRRR is showing a pretty messy setup down here around 9, 10, 11 o'clock tomorrow evening, but I do think at some point we're going to start to see some sort of breakthrough where there will be 1 or 2 storms that produce produce the potential for a strong or even long track tornado. Now, for now, it looks a little bit messy, but again, I think that'll change as we get a little bit closer. And then as we go into Saturday morning, there will be a risk of severe weather down into the Dixie Alley, which we're going to talk more about here in just a second. Now let's talk more about what is upcoming for Saturday. Our tornado risk continues to climb here across the Dixie Alley, with even in the morning hours, tornado parameter values very elevated in Louisiana, Mississippi, and Alabama, and these numbers stay high even as we go into the afternoon hours. We are expecting a line of thunderstorms to develop a bit further back to the west, where damaging winds and a few tornadoes will be embedded in that line, but what's more concerning are any discrete cells that fire off out in front of that line of storms. And we're also forecasting a very large warm sector, which means that these storms are going to have a lot of room to work with when it comes to producing tornadoes. So overall, Saturday is very concerning, and I am still fully expecting that we will see a high risk of severe weather somewhere in the Dixie Alley on Saturday, pending any major changes to the forecast. Now let's talk more about the timing for severe weather, beginning with what's happening overnight Friday night. There will be a couple of storms that fire off just after midnight in Alabama and Mississippi, where a strong tornado, in addition to damaging winds and hail, will be in play. Unfortunately, this hail and tornado risk is likely going to be happening around 3 to 6 a.m. That is terrible timing, so make sure that you have multiple ways to receive alerts. These storms will likely weaken as we get closer to sunrise, as they move into Alabama and as well as parts of northern Georgia. And then we're anticipating a large area of storm activity to develop during the late morning hours, with mostly just some damaging winds, hail, and a low tornado risk existing. But that tornado risk will really take off around and just after lunchtime. Notice how many storms are rotating according to the HRRR model right around 12 p.m. on Saturday. We got a ton of storms rotating out in front of the line. Those are your discrete supercells. And then we also have a line of thunderstorms a little bit back out here to the west, which is going to be producing some widespread damaging winds in addition to the threat for tornadoes. Now, unfortunately, the HRRR model does not go past 1 p.m. on Saturday for right now. With that said, it's going to be a very similar trend where we will likely still have several discrete cells moving across parts of Alabama into the mid-afternoon hours, and this will eventually approach Georgia and eastern Tennessee during the very late afternoon and early evening with mainly damaging winds, but tornadoes are going to still be a possibility out of all of this activity. So please make sure that you have multiple ways to receive alerts, have a tornado action plan ready to go. We will be live covering this for the majority of Saturday, and we'll also be live on Friday, so make sure you're subscribed to the channel and click the bell icon down below so you're notified when we do go live. And also, we'll have a lot more details in terms of timing in tomorrow morning's video on this channel. And then back over into the Ohio Valley for Saturday, we are expecting some storm activity as we go into the late afternoon hours. In Indiana and as well as Ohio, most of these storms will be elevated, but there could be a couple storms there that produce damaging winds, hail, and a couple of tornadoes. But again, it's a conditional risk up into parts of the Ohio Valley. I think our best chance really for any sort of tornadic activity anywhere this far to the north will probably be geared towards the late evening, and it will be predominantly in eastern Kentucky and Tennessee. So make sure that you have multiple ways to receive alerts if you're in this area, as we are once again going to be likely dealing with a more nocturnal tornado threat. We do have a huge risk when it comes to our fire threat as we go into tomorrow. There are red flag warnings in effect from South Dakota all the way into Texas. This is one of the largest areas that I've ever seen when it comes to red flag warnings. If this storm was not already chaotic enough, this just makes it even more chaotic with how much of a fire risk that we have for tomorrow. And our wind gusts for tomorrow will be very high. Starting tomorrow morning, wind gusts upwards of 50 to 75 miles per hour are in the forecast in Texas and Oklahoma. And even during the afternoon hours, the winds will still stay very strong out of the southwest, which will lead to very primed fire conditions in addition to very low relative humidity. So make sure you're doing your part in preventing fires from developing, and make sure to spread the word about this significant threat. And the fire weather risk has expanded for many areas in the central and southern plains and into the Midwest. We now have an elevated fire risk in parts of the Ohio Valley and the Midwest. We did not have this, by the way, this morning. There's also a chance for some isolated dry thunderstorms, which could spark some fires during the afternoon tomorrow in western Missouri and eastern Kansas. And then our extreme fire risk is in the pink, which is where the highest risk currently resides for southeast Kansas, central Oklahoma, and also back into north Texas. The next 72 hours will be crazy when it comes to our weather, so make sure you are subscribed to the channel and click the bell icon down below so you're notified with the latest updates. We will be live on Friday and Saturday with long and in-depth coverage of both severe weather outbreaks. We could even be live on Sunday, and I wouldn't even rule out a live stream late tonight. We might do a little live update around 9 o'clock Central Time. If that happens, again, it'll be closer to 9 o'clock Central Time. A little bit late, but nonetheless, make sure you stay tuned, and we'll see you guys all again in the next video.